There is better news tonight. Case rates are slowly coming down, but the stories from the NHS front line remain brutal.
I'm sorry, bit upset. It's just devastating.
I just want to get better.
We clearly have weeks of lockdown ahead, but Tory rebels are now demanding a clear timetable for restoring all of our freedoms. Also on News at 10 tonight. The success of our vaccine rollout and why the rest of Europe lags far behind us.
Dissatisfaction with the speed of the rollout in this region of Italy has already cost the local Minister for Health his job. But in fact, the Italians are going pretty quickly compared to the painfully slow progress in France.
The fishermen left high and dry by Brexit.
I've been fishing for 40 years and I've never known it as bad as it is just now. The problem's not with the French. The problem's here.
Don't you think it's arrogant for players to say they can't change the way they behave?
Yeah, I think, just to be clear on that, footballers are doing everything that everyone else has been asked to do as well.
The Premier League clubs under pressure to end goal celebrations and...
Soon may the wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum.
The Scottish postman bringing old sea shanties to new audiences.
It's went further than I could ever imagine.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. No matter how many times we see pictures of packed COVID wards up and down the country and hear the accounts of desperately sick patients fighting for breath and life within them, not to mention the overworked staff struggling to keep them alive, the brutal realities of the state we're in never fail to shock. No doubt we'd all like to be talking and thinking about something else by now, and one day soon we will, but sadly, not yet. Emily reported from one such hospital last night. Tonight, she has been to another where the situation is, I'm afraid, just as bleak. The physical and the emotional strain on staff, some of whom end up as patients themselves, is enormous. And whilst they toil, there are a record number of people awaiting treatment. 4.5 million in England alone at the end of November. Helping them is another huge challenge on the horizon for medics already at their limit.
Are you comfortable like that? This is a bit better for your breathing. So it's better for you to lie. I know that it's uncomfortable and I'm sorry, but it's much better. It means that the oxygen levels in your blood go up. So
Isabel's trying to help her patient get more oxygen into her lungs. COVID care has become all too familiar here. Patients are admitted to this ward from A&E. Some don't have COVID, but most do.
Just called the ambulance. They said it was going to be between 4 to 5 hours.
Oh, wow. Siobhan is nursing one of her colleagues. Now a COVID patient, Christina is feeling the pressures the healthcare service is under from her bed.
I suppose you understand the pain patients go through. You just have to do it. It's not going to put me off looking after people. I just want to get better.
COVID patients have filled almost all the intensive care units here, taking up nearly 80% of the space.
Unsurprisingly, every single bed in this ICU ward is taken up with a patient. It doesn't just affect other COVID patients who need a bed, but non-COVID patients who are desperate for treatment.
Almost 4.5 million people in England were waiting to start hospital treatment at the end of November, a record high. 192,000 have waited more than a year to start their surgery, a massive jump from the same month the previous year, while the number of people being admitted for routine treatment was down almost a third.
So not only do we have people dying of COVID and tens of thousands of families affected by that, at home is an ever-growing pool of patients who cannot get the care they need. And those patients will be coming to harm at home. And part of the reason we keep banging on about this is we want to get those patients back into hospital.
Round the corner, Alan's hoping to leave ICU.
I felt myself desperately ill the last 2 weeks.
He was so ill, though, it'll be at least another week, and medics know another COVID patient will take his bed.
I'm sorry, bit upset. It's just devastating.
Listen, you're doing well, okay? You're getting better. Let's get you home, all right?
We know the coronavirus is devastating the lives of tens of thousands. How many other lives of routine patients it will ruin is still not known. Emily Morgan, News at 10 at St George's Hospital in London.
My God, those scenes are hard to witness night after night. But while the situation is undeniably, as you can see, pretty desperate in hospitals, there is better news on cases. New research from Public Health England reveals rates have fallen in most of the country and among all ages, apart from the over 80s. For now, though, the government will give nothing away about when restrictions might be eased. Instead, it's announced more travel rules, this time to keep the new Brazilian variant of the virus out, banning visitors from South America and Portugal.
The last arrivals at Heathrow tonight before the travel ban on South America and Portugal begins. Some who flew in from Lisbon had begun their journey in Brazil, where a dangerous new variant of COVID-19 is spreading.
We come from Brazil and Portugal, and then to be able to come here, that's very frustrating for everybody. But
whatever the problems caused by the ban, others were just relieved to have made it back.
It's very lucky that we flew today. We're just very grateful we managed to get in, because we would have been stuck there with no way of getting home.
It's feared the new strain is behind the latest surge in cases in Brazil, a country which has already seen 200,000 deaths. Scientists here warned on Tuesday action was needed to stop it getting into Britain, a warning ministers have now heeded.
Given that we've now put 3 million jabs into the arms of the most vulnerable, older community, we don't want to trip up at this late stage. We're so close now that we want to make sure we do absolutely everything possible to give us the best chance of beating this virus.
Today there were signs that the lockdown may just be working, despite the explosion in cases of a new homegrown variant in December. The latest survey from Public Health England suggests infections peaked at the end of last year, coming down steeply overall in the last 2 weeks. But whereas the decline was most obvious for those in their 30s, among over 70s cases only levelled off and worryingly continued to rise in the over 80s. One scientist who models the spread of coronavirus for the government says it's too early to discern a clear trend.
I would say it's cautiously good news that things are turning around, but I would want to see about a week or two more of data to really put together evidence that we believe that we are past the peak and cases are starting to come down across the country.
Even if there is a sustained fall in cases, it's unlikely the pressures on hospitals will ease for several weeks. It's why the government is still weighing up even tighter restrictions at home as well as at the borders.
And Libby joins me now. Look, as you said there, we may get more restrictions in the short term, and there is a tension. A lot of people are very worried about this, but there are plenty of others who want their freedoms back and their businesses open and everything else. Tory MPs clearly getting a bit impatient, or some of them, with the Prime Minister and with the lockdown.
Yes, well, it was a Tory Home Secretary today who said that there wouldn't be any changes this week. She didn't rule out some changes next week. And in the same interview on This Morning, she suggested that people should only be exercising alone. She did it repeatedly. She said you shouldn't run with other people, you shouldn't cycle with other people. Now, the rule, which I presume she does know, is at the moment you can exercise with one other person. It may be that behind the scenes they are mulling over the change that she seemed to be suggesting was a good idea this morning. But later on today, one backbencher, Steve Baker, a prominent Brexit rebel who saw off Theresa May's government, he was making very threatening noises about the direction of travel that Boris Johnson is taking the country, saying that the strategy, it's a strategy that hammers freedom, and inevitably the Prime Minister's leadership will be on the table. Now, it's pretty extraordinary language given that last week he did support this third lockdown, but I think it's an indication that there is real concern on the backbenchers that this cannot drag on, that once the vaccinations have been rolled out to the most vulnerable in the population, there are many who want to see the lockdown lifted.
OK. Libby. Let's see, thank you very much indeed. Now, wherever you live, people will be eagerly awaiting the call to say it's time to get vaccinated, but it seems how soon that comes is something of a postcode lottery. Nearly half of the over 80s in the North East and Yorkshire have been vaccinated, but in London and the east of England, that number drops to less than 1 in 3. So far, almost 3 million people in the UK have had their first dose of the all-important vaccine. Today, the rollout faced a new obstacle: heavy snowfall forcing some appointments to be cancelled.
For most people in the north of England, the stay-at-home advice was a blessing today.
It seemed like a good idea coming down here.
But not for those who needed to go out to get their vaccine. Elderly patients were advised to stay away from some centres, though many surgeries, like this one in Leeds, were determined to stay open for those who battled the weather to keep their appointment.
We've managed to get the word out in terms of trying to help us with the roads and the facilities. Volunteers have stepped in. We've also had people working in the background to try and fill up any cancellations.
96-year-old Peggy Davis had to miss her appointment after being snowed in, the second time that's happened to her in a week.
If the weather continues to be like this, there's going to be whole batches of people that haven't been able to be vaccinated, and that's going to surely have a knock-on effect to other groups. And when we're in such a dire situation as we are with the rates at the moment, it feels a bit stressful that they're going to be able to fulfil that promise.
That promise is to provide a first dose to the 14 million most vulnerable patients by the middle of next month.
Relax, short scratch.
But there's been concern about supply in some places, like parts of Greater Manchester, and new figures show a regional divide in the rollout success so far. In the North East and Yorkshire, 49% of those over 80 have already been vaccinated. In the North West, Midlands, South East and South West, the figure is around 35%, with the East of England and London further behind at around 30%.
There is a variation, clearly, as you can see in the regional data, and we're pushing for more data. Why? Because then we can see where we need to focus more, where we need to put more resource into areas so that we can actually get the numbers up of the most vulnerable.
You want to hang your coat on the back? Today, the first 6 community pharmacies to offer the jab welcomed their first patients. A third of those over 80 in England have now received the vaccine. But the winter weather will be just one of the many complications in the weeks to come. Ben Chapman, News at 10.
While ministers here admit there will be some bumps on the road to getting jabs to those most in need, the rollout has, it's fair to say, gone an awful lot smoother than in the European Union, or what we used to call the rest of the European Union. In the UK, the number of vaccinations given so far is 4.52 per 100 people. That's well ahead of other major European countries, such as Italy's 1.47 and Germany's 0.9, France's feeble 0.3, and at the bottom of the list, the Netherlands, with just 0.27 per 100 people. Well, as you may remember, Italy was the first European country to be gripped by the virus. The question many will ask then is why they were not ready to hit the ground running when the vaccine arrived.
A piece of performance art fills the Piazza del Duomo in the centre of Milan as part of a dramatic, eye-catching campaign urging sceptical Italians to get the COVID vaccine. The irony, of course, is that in a region so badly hit by the virus, millions are desperate for their jab, but a combination of limited supplies and poor organisation means they're likely to wait many months. At the principal hospitals in Lombardy, there are enough doses being prepared only to vaccinate health workers, hospital staff and those in care homes. A general inoculation of the over 80s and those with underlying conditions, that won't start for weeks yet. Top doctors recognise they are playing catch-up.
We have to get better organized than we were at the very beginning, but what we are seeing day by day is a significant increase in the number of people who are vaccinated. So
you're confident that the machine is now accelerating?
It's now accelerating, and I hope that this will bring us to reach something similar to what is expected to be obtained in the UK.
Like all EU countries, they can so far only use the German Pfizer vaccine, with just a handful of doses of the very recently approved American version. Oxford's AstraZeneca vaccine is still not approved here, which makes supplies much less plentiful than in the UK. Dissatisfaction with the speed of the rollout in this region of Italy has already cost the local Minister for Health his job. But in fact, the Italians are going pretty quickly compared to the painfully slow progress in France and in the Netherlands, where the first dose was only administered a week ago. In France, vaccine skepticism is so rampant they're marketing it with images of a glamorous, elderly, virus-fighting superhero. But so worried are the authorities that millions will refuse to take it that they've rolled it out with extreme caution.
It's slow because the hesitancy in France is so high, because at one point there are polls saying that only 40% of the population was willing to be vaccinated as soon as possible.
President Macron is known to be frustrated that their numbers are barely a tenth of those in the UK. But the slow progress is worrying leaders everywhere. If countries like the US and Britain start getting back to normal before they do, because they went harder and faster on vaccinations, they will expect there to be a political price to pay. James Mates, News at 10, Milan.
All right, let's move on to other news now. And the removal vans at the White House today were a sign that President Trump's time there is almost up, though not because of his second impeachment, which won't go to a Senate trial until after his term ends next week. He made no mention of that, nor of Joe Biden, in a video released late last night. Instead, having been accused of inciting last week's storming of the Capitol, he urged supporters to remain peaceful during protests planned for his final days in office.
The nation's capital is tonight locked down, ahead of next week's inauguration, with security concerns exceptionally high after last week's storming of Congress. Thousands of troops are fanning out across Capitol Hill. Inside what is perhaps now the most heavily protected building in the world, the Speaker of the House last night strode past the cameras to exact her revenge on the president. Her office had been ransacked by pro-Trump supporters.
Here you go, brother.
Who even held up her splintered nameplate to our camera. And now in this single article of impeachment, she had found her perfect response to last week.
Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to our country, and that once again, we honored our oath of office.
And then she signed the document. This time the charge was inciting an insurrection. It is still unclear when exactly the Senate will begin this second impeachment trial of Donald J. Trump, and whether enough Republicans will turn on him to ensure his conviction. The president appears to belatedly recognize his severe legal jeopardy, telling his supporters to stand down.
There is never a justification for violence. No excuses, no exceptions. America is a nation of laws. Those who engaged in the attacks last week will be brought to justice. Now I am asking everyone who has ever believed in our agenda to be thinking of ways to ease tensions.
I think they should convict him and then bar him from ever holding public office again.
James Comey, the former FBI director who fell out spectacularly with the president, told ITV News that the statement by Trump denouncing violence reminded him of a hostage video.
Someone held in a cave somewhere in Afghanistan is handed a piece of paper and told he must read it. And the people who are giving him that piece of paper are smarter than he is, because they realize the jeopardy he's in and they're trying to moonwalk out of it.
It says something about the president's extreme isolation that he had to post that video on the White House YouTube channel. His own personal social media accounts have all been blocked. And with troops on the streets, he is limping towards the very end of a shattered presidency. At the White House, the removal vans are already in place. Donald Trump's possessions now being taken out, ahead of Joe Biden's arrival in just 5 days' time. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
And you can hear more of that interview with former FBI Director James Comey on our ITV News podcast, Calling Peston. Just search for Calling Peston wherever you get your podcasts. OK, back here, the government is once again under pressure over free school meals after it said they wouldn't be extended over the February half-term, with councils providing food instead. It follows those pictures earlier this week of Miega food parcels provided to families and is the latest in a string of controversies. Now, footballer Marcus Rashford has teamed up with celebrity chefs, NGOs and charities to write to the Prime Minister urging him to carry out an in-depth review of the policy. The issue of fishing is proving just as much of a headache after Brexit talks as it was during them. British fishermen have been caught up in red tape since we left the single market. Delays mean millions of pounds worth of Scottish seafood are being rejected. Such is the anger that some have threatened to dump rotting seafood outside Parliament. Boris Johnson has promised them compensation, but that may not shake the feeling that, in the words of Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, they have been left high and dry.
When the boat comes in, the clock starts ticking and it's all hands on deck. Langoustines landed on the Clyde have 24 hours to reach the markets in France, still alive. Scotland's ability to deliver like this is what makes the langoustines so valuable. But when Brexit kicked in, overnight, that stopped happening, and these trawlermen are counting the cost.
It's been getting held up. The vans and the lorries have been getting stuck just, I think it's at Dover or Calais for about 24 hours to 2 days, 3 days, I think.
What does that do to a live catch like this?
Dead. Game over.
A dead langoustine is worth nothing, but this produce isn't just being shut out at the French border. From the sea, this catch is taken to Glasgow for processing, but before it can be sent to the EU, it now needs to be examined by a health officer in the UK, and there simply aren't enough of them just now to keep up.
You know, on the TV, on the radio, on the newspaper, you know, be ready for the Brexit, be ready for the Brexit. We are ready. We do all the paperwork, you know, to export our products, but the government are not ready, for sure.
Waiting for paperwork, the fresh langoustines would simply go off, so Ronald's been forced to freeze, which right away cuts the sale price in half. But to keep the fishermen in work, he is now stockpiling a backlog of frozen langoustines, unheard of in Scotland before Brexit, because by now they should already be here on the counter of a market in France.
I order exactly Thursday and Friday to get the fish Saturday morning, and a lot of fish missing.
How much?
120 kilos.
Veteran trawlerman Alistair was and still is a supporter of Brexit, holding out hope that these are just very severe teething problems.
I've been fishing for 40 years and I've never known it as bad as it is just now. The problem's not with the French, the problem's here.
You believe that Brexit would be good?
Yes, definitely, yes. We were told it was going to be a sea of opportunity. That was the words that Mr Johnson used.
Seeing the reality, how it's hitting your industry just now, have you changed your mind?
You'll need to ask me that one in 3 weeks' time if this doesn't rectify itself.
A thriving industry in Scotland has quite suddenly stopped functioning. There is still hope that Britain and the EU will work this out, and that hope is all that drives these fishermen to go back out to sea again each night, because right now there is no guarantee that there will be a buyer for their catch, or that any of them will be paid. Peter Smith, News at 10, Largs.
For people waiting patiently to finally hug loved ones again, images of footballers huddling together in celebration may be a bit hard to swallow. Some of their managers, though, don't seem convinced it can be avoided when emotions run high on the pitch, and that's obviously despite stricter COVID measures being introduced to avoid more games being called off.
Managers were leading by example tonight as Arsenal welcome Crystal Palace at the Emirates.
Well, the players making their way out of the tunnel, socially distanced, of course.
Players too were under pressure to show they were being COVID aware. But this is a contact sport, and when there's a chance of scoring, the rules go out of the window.
The real moment of joy, like we work all the time, all the teams, all the clubs, to the moment that we score a goal, say the players don't hug you, don't celebrate it together, is an instinct reaction, so it's difficult. So I don't know we will be able to do it.
Outstanding finish
His team certainly couldn't contain themselves last night after Phil Foden scored the winner. Today, the football authorities issued a joint statement urging everyone in the sport to set an example.
If we want to take the instinct out of the game, I think it's not that simple.
Chelsea's manager echoing how difficult players would find it if they weren't allowed to celebrate. Don't you think it's arrogant for players to say they can't change the way they behave when so many of the rest of us are having to do things differently?
I think, just to be clear on that, footballers are doing everything that everyone else has been asked to do as well. To control the emotions, I think, is a fair ask, but to dictate emotions, I think, will probably be very difficult on pitch.
Just do it for a few weeks, just while we get through this, so that people at home who are social distancing, that are respecting the rules, that they don't see people on TV not doing so, that they are able to see that their heroes, if you like, are setting a really good example.
Players are regularly tested. Referees could book them for goal celebrations, but that would require new laws. Tonight, there was no need for any sanction since it ended goalless. Juliet Bremner, News at 10.
Well, still on sport, next month's delayed Australia Open may still come too soon for Sir Andy Murray after the former tennis world #1 tested positive for coronavirus. He was due to travel to Australia this week on a chartered flight laid on by tournament organisers, but he is currently isolating but healthy at home. OK, finally, when fishermen sang hundreds of years ago about waiting for the wellerman to come to bring them sugar and tea and rum, they did it, of course, to keep their spirits up. Well, now those ancient sea shanties have had an unlikely meeting with modern technology. It is thanks to Scottish postman Nathan Evans, who's been sharing them on TikTok. His catchy videos have been watched millions of times all around the world, and just like for those fishermen many years ago, brought some much-needed joy.
Soon may the wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
His videos have been watched by millions. Traditional music not just finding a home on the social media platform TikTok, but building a following too.
One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
As postman Nathan Evans went about his frozen business in Airdrie today, he had one eye on his deliveries and another on his online success.
Never in a million years would I have expected it to go so viral and so crazy and reach how many people it has so far. It's absolutely mental. It's went further than I could ever imagine. So that's the dream, to one day be able to sing for people and put my music out there for everybody to listen to.
Soon may the wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum.
This was Nathan's original TikTok video that went viral. Becoming so popular, it inspired thousands around the world to record their own versions, bringing centuries-old sea shanties to a whole new generation of music lovers.
Come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
Nathan's dream of making money from his music is inspired in part by a sea shanty singing group 500 miles to the south.
I love you in the springtime and the fall. Little eyes, I love you. Little eyes, I love you.
In Cornwall, the success of Port Isaac's Fishermen's Friends led to a film, and singer John Cleave isn't surprised by how far Nathan Evans' music has travelled.
When the songs evolved 150, 200 years ago, the crews of the ships that they evolved on were very often multiracial crews. And so you get different elements from different parts of the world in all the songs.
Oh, we'll be all right if the wind was in our sails.
Sea shanties are songs to work to. They have an enduring appeal. And just as merchant seamen use them to help get through their shifts, so one Scottish postman has found his way of delivering a first-class tune. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10.
Nathan Evans, God bless him. Tempted to sing you out, but I'll spare you. See you tomorrow.